In this video, I'm going to break down the pros and cons of subways in New York City. Now, I think every New Yorker has a love-hate relationship with the subways because at times you're like, thank God there's subways that exist, and then other times you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to ride the subway again. So I'm going to break down the reasons why in this video. Now, one of the biggest pros of subways in New York City is you can get pretty much anywhere on the subways in New York City. Now, most people do not have a car here, and even if you have a car here, you're probably not using it to get uptown and downtown and into the other boroughs on a daily basis. So I myself have a car here, yet I am only doing that very occasionally. Now, another pro about the subways is it's relatively inexpensive. Now, the MTA has been raising fare every so often, which I'm very against because people have no option but to pay it. But at the same time, it still is a relatively inexpensive option, especially if you're comparing it to getting a rideshare car, which is absolutely crazy in comparison to the subways. So it is inexpensive, so that makes it affordable for most people to be able to afford to get on the subways and get in and out of other boroughs and across Manhattan. Now, time to get into some of the cons of the New York City subway system. I would say there's a lot. So if you go to any other city in pretty much the world and look at their subways, train systems, you will notice how dirty and old New York City subways can look. Like very, very, very like basically destroyed in comparison to like other subways and trains around the world. Like it's actually crazy. And sometimes when you're in your New York City bubble, you don't even really notice or think of these things until you go somewhere else and then you see the difference and you're like, oh my gosh, our trains are absolutely horrible. Now, New York City obviously knows this and they are like launching new trains literally as we speak right now, but they're rolling them out slowly because they're not gonna just like redo all the trains overnight. So it is something that the city is trying to take care of. However, it's gonna be a while before all of these old trains are kind of like gotten rid of and the new trains are coming in. So it's just like a running joke with New Yorkers that the trains are just so dirty and old. Now, another huge con is that, and you might have noticed this already if you have even just visited New York City. So trains are always either under maintenance or just not running in general. There are times where just a certain subway line is just not running at all. So you just cannot get on the subway line. Now, if you're ever in Manhattan on the weekends, you will also notice that there's weekend schedules for subways. So the trains that you're so used to taking during the day might not even exist on the weekends, or, this happens too, the train that you're used to taking uptown, downtown Manhattan is now running on a different line. So they literally switch the line of the subway. So instead of taking this train, this letter train, you're now on this number train, and that's just how it works for the weekend. So not only is it hard enough to learn the regular weekday schedule of trains, but you also have to learn a completely different schedule for weekends that is honestly just like so hard to keep track of. So to me, that is like the biggest con, is like you're constantly like dealing with like trains shutting on and off and then just having to like reshuffle to a different train or no train because you can't catch a train. So I would say that you would think it's more reliable than it actually is. Sometimes the trains could just be so unreliable, and it's so common for people to be running late in New York City because trains. You're like, oh, train traffic. Oh, the trains aren't running. Like that's like the most common reason. You can literally go into work and be like, sorry, my train was delayed by 45 minutes. And people are like, yeah, that sounds about right because it's so common here. So good excuse if you're ever late to work. I didn't tell you that. So yes, train maintenance, train traffic, trains being broken down are definitely an issue. So sometimes when you're underground in the train, sometimes the train will just stop because of traffic, like literally just stop for like 30 minutes, if not more. I mean, it might not happen that often to you, but it's happened enough to me in my lifetime to share it in this video, where you're just on the train, underground, and like, you don't know why, and they're like, delayed. The conductor will like be on the line being like, delayed, we're waiting for train traffic, or there's a backup, something, you know, like it's crazy. Like that's like, and you just have no control over that. So that's very, very frustrating part of the New York City subways. Now, another topic that has come up recently is safety on the New York City subways. And I really hate to bring this up, but it is something that I hear a lot from people, is their concern on the safety recently of the New York City subways. Now, I do have to say, when people listen to the news is always going to give you the worst case scenario of a situation, right? Because that's how they make money off of viewership, of people watching crazy stories. So it's always going to give you the negative or like the 1 in a million story. So I do think that when people hear things happening in the subways, that they should also think about like all the people who went through the same subways and nothing happened to them, right? So I do think that that's something to consider. However, I do think also that there has been a lot more crime taking place in the New York City subways than over the past years. And recently I've noticed the difference as well in my time in New York City. So it is something that I want you to be very careful with as well. Now, I'm recording this video in 2023, so hopefully, if you're watching this video in the future, this is something that I know that New York City is trying to get more under control, but it is definitely something that you have to consider as well. If you're riding alone, be aware of your surroundings, and if you can go with someone else or be with someone else, that is definitely helpful because you're less likely to be approached if you're with another person, of course. Now, I want you to also consider riding late at night. Now, in my early 20s, this is something that I used to do very, very often because I didn't really have any other way of getting around New York City, and honestly, I couldn't afford to take these ride shares all the time in New York City, especially when I was in my really young 20s. So I did take the subway late at night. And I would not suggest doing that now. I wouldn't, to be aware of what's going on, especially late at night anywhere in the world, but please just be careful late at night on the subways. Okay guys, so I hope that helped you kind of understand both the pros and the cons of New York City subways. If you have anything to add in the comments or want to just share your crazy story about the New York City subways, please do, because I really do love hearing your stories, because I really do think that it's going to help all of our community here in the comments. So as always, I love hearing from you guys.